really excited to be here with you all in our private little studio. And I'm really excited to talk with you all about how does your artistic work reflect your other identities, tools and approaches that are transferable. So I think a really great place to start is if we just go around our circle and introduce ourselves, where we're coming from, and maybe one sentence about our artistic practice, because it sounds like we don't need to do a full intro. So hi, my name is Pelena Kike Brown. I am an artist from Aotearoa or New Zealand. I am Samoan and Pākehā, and I'm a disabled artist that's looking at disability cultural concepts and Indigenous cultural concepts across performance, writing, movement and technology. So I'm really excited to be here with you all.
My name's Maria O'Shoddy and I'm from the UK. I am a middle-aged, mixed heritage, African British woman, she, her. I'm brown-skinned with brown curly hair and a black jumper and wearing a pair of kind of terracotta kind of dungarees today and some sunglasses. I'm visually impaired and I have worked in the arts all my life. I currently run an arts organisation, but I'm also an independent practicing artist.
Nazywam się Katarzyna Żeglicka. Okay.
My name is Katarzyna Żeglicka and I come from Poland. I'm an activist and an artist, a queer feminist activist and artist. My artistic practice comes from my activist background actually, and I'm mostly into preparing and performing pieces that take up the theme of violence and discrimination against persons with disabilities, mainly women with disabilities and queer people.
Thank you.
My name is Edu O. I am an artist. I work with dance, literature, visual arts, and I also am a professor in dance at the Federal University of Bahia. My work attempts to investigate the work of artists with disability, understanding the monolithical approach of the Wide North as this white, archaic approach of artists with disability, and working as an artist with a disability and creating an approach where it is inclusive and open.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing is that a lot of us are in between, and I would love to explore with us all. It seems like we're wrestling between two identities or more. It might be queerness and disability, or race and disability, or gender and disability. So I'd love to, first of all, look at the intersections and what are those that you're kind of wrestling with, and how does that inform your work?
I believe that the idea of identities needs to be a discussion that is open and problematized, because the multiplicity of identities is what's constructing us. In the terms of my own work, I am an artist, I'm a gay, cisgender man with disability from the countryside in Brazil, and all those identities inform my work. Because when we talk about identities, all those identities in themselves are totems, but that can be broken and explored in a multiplicity of shapes and looks. And that also informs our identity and our praxis.
That's really interesting, because I think that I remember once doing an exercise in a theatre sort of workshop, and it was around status, and one of the things they said was status is given. So if you're in a room on your own, you are in relation to no one, and so your status is ill-defined or undefined unless you carry some internal dialogue with you that imposes this, in your body or something. But usually status is in relationship with whoever you happen to be with. And what you said there, Ida, about the thing about, you know, this multiplicity of identities, I really relate to, because, you know, I'm you know, mixed heritage, and I'm a working class, and, you know, there's all these different things, but they're like all defined by society. So if actually I'm just a human being. You talk about the spaces in between. That's the space in between where I'm just a breathing body that's alive, you know, and then, you know, you're afterwards sort of defined by everything that gets thrown at you, and your kind of response is kind of, you know, it's kind of measured or controlled by that, and that's the filter that, you know, you then have to move through this world, you know. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say really at that point.
No,
I'm wondering, I feel like I always have more questions than answers.
niż odpowiedzi. Czasami
Sometimes I perceive identity as a cage that I'm kind of trapped in, and sometimes I feel myself liberated from all this. I feel like more often than not, my identities kind of contradict one another, because at least in my context, for example, myself identifying as queer kind of excludes me from the community of people with disabilities.
chcesz tłumaczyć?
This is especially true, this is mostly true in the Polish context, where the right-wing party, together with the Catholic Church, are the dominating force, and hence it is easy to feel like my multiple identities are mutually exclusive, or kind of cannot coexist. I feel like the approach to disability in Poland also kind of, from the word go, excludes any other identities possible, as if we get reduced to a single identity as people with disabilities.
Samościach. Ale na co ostatnio zwracam bardzo uwagę, jest
However, I've been lately thinking about broadening the concept of identity. And in my thinking about identity and disability, I feel like I need to broaden the way I think about it, and one of the greatest sources of inspiration is the way we think about animals
zwierząt i do roślin.
and plants. I also feel like maybe I don't need to perceive myself that much as a human being, but maybe just a being that shares this world with a host of other beings that should be equally respected, even though they are currently not.
Szanowana tak jak wszystkie istoty, a które nie są szanowane.
Yeah, it's really interesting how everyone approached the question differently. Like listening to Kasia, I feel like you gave us a really important cultural context of where you're coming from, but then also there's this resistance to all the labels, like Edu, you're all these things, but also you're more than them or less than them, and it's more complicated. When I think about the cultural context that I come from Aotearoa, but my parents are both immigrants. And then I traveled to a place and decided that I also was an immigrant, because I'm also interested around language. Normally people who identify as immigrants are normally brown, and if you identify as, what do they call it? An expat, you're normally white. So I'm also really interested in what labels you do choose to identify, and then the ones that you refuse, because I think often the people who get to refuse them maybe have privilege. Even with visual description, if you know, I notice a lot of white people don't say white, and if you're brown and you forget to say brown, everyone always corrects you, which again is a form of privilege, or who is the normative color. But I guess I want to go deeper into your identities, into your cultural context, and then how is it reflected in your work? Because that I think would be really important for people to hear, and something I just want to know more about.
Can you
Yeah.
repeat the last question?
So I think we've talked about identities and cultural contexts, and I want to know how that's reflected in your work. So I want to talk about your art practice now. and how that relates or doesn't relate. It doesn't have to connect at all.
You talk. You tell us. Go on.
Oh, how I know. What was my own question? Cultural. How does? Yeah. How does?
Cool things earlier.
How does my
Just
work?
repeat that.
Repeat that. So my work. I definitely love this in-between space that I think we're all drawn to. So my work is kind of embedded in this practice of the va, which means in-between space or space and time, and it needs to be activated by relationship. So you can't just have space over there. You need to have two people who are relating across time and space, and culturally in the Samoan culture, that can be between brother and sister, between your parents. So we're culturally we do a lot of service, and so you can see the relationships by the way that we are with each other, or who we serve, or who we look after, all those kinds of things.
So time and space is really interesting. I spent a long time running an arts company, which has taken all of my energy, and though it's been a worthy cause in that it's I've been creating the time and the space for other visually impaired artists to do their thing, and getting something out of it myself. Like I get a regular salary, which is great. I haven't had much time for my own practice, but I've made some recently. I say recently because my work is really slow. It's interesting to think about Crypttime, and I know you're talking about it in terms of relationship, but also something about it being allowing yourself to be slow and for things to take their own time as well. So I've created a project recently where I started it in 2014, and I just finished the R&D last year. And that was connecting myself with another blind theatre director who's African American, and looking. He lived in Los Angeles, and I live in London, and I was looking at his space, or inviting him to look at his space, and me looking at mine through the lens of us being, I know I'm using very kind of visual language here, but through the kind of lens of us being blind and moving through our cities, what that means in terms of memory, visual memory, and our kind of psychogeography. And so that's a project that's still underway. Unfortunately, my collaborator has died in the process, but I haven't let that stop me. I don't think death should get in the way of a good project, and in some ways adds to it, even though obviously the loss of a dear friend in the corporeal sense is acute. But you know, I guess I'm just always intrigued by the thing of just exploring this kind of dynamic space of experiencing the world the way that I do in this current body, and how that relates to others. So yeah, that's me really.
It's also important because my main work at the moment is working with audiences from the early childhood. I use to compose that work my own memories of my own early childhood and how I related to that, and how my work is informed by how I was as an early child. and still being a person with a disability, a person that existed, a being, like what Kasia was saying earlier, and how that informs my work. So, and it's very important for me as well in my work, the idea of breaking the barriers between spaces, to not box things up into the tiny spaces where people are, especially the idea of hierarchical spaces to be informed. So it's not me just sitting and someone observing someone perform, or me performing for someone to be watching what I'm doing. It's about collaboration and how those collaborations inform our work and build our work in an influx of creativity. How can the children be working with us and being able to touch, to understand space, understand the proximity of others, understand how they can relate on stage to each other. Very recently worked in a solo called Judith Wants to Cry But Can't. That is exactly about creating this interwoven net of relationships, of interconnectivity between different people in different stages of life, and how that relationship informs us as practitioners and as audiences as well. So just to conclude, what I meant to breaking those boxes and spaces of identity is exactly that. With my work, what I try to do is to get out of this idea of having to box ourselves up into one single identity as a gay person, as a man or a woman, as a person with a disability, and see that I can do so much on stage, and how can I move, how can I interact with things on stage, and allowing the children that are watching that and that are participating in the process to also see themselves as participants in that, and how they can influence and interact with those breakages of boxes.
Because whatever is white, able, or male is goes unnoticed. I mean, is kind of default, and the things that I do, they will immediately be more visible. So I feel like it's, in a way, it's cost efficient, that I don't struggle against these things all the time, like every day in the street, but that I transfer them into my artistic practice, and I try to relate to this somehow, or react to this, or counteract this in my artistic practice, like this immediate boxing. Before it escapes me again, I also want to add that all of this is, for me, is very much related to the opposition, or like tension, between the way I identify myself and the way others perceive me, and thus also identify me as something, because this is more often than not so completely different.
But also, speaking of the Brazilian context, it's important to take notice that I'm speaking of a place of privilege. I'm speaking of a place of an artist that managed to do all that we spoke of, but also an artist that is here, that is able to share their practice with everybody in a different context. For me, it's also a very lonely task, all that is going on, because I am one of those people working with children, also to keep doing my own practice, to keep doing my own work, and to break those boxes. So what I'm trying to do is not to just be the one artist, but to walk together, to start creating those links, and finding those places where we can actually create a network, a group of people that are sharing their work, sharing their experiences, and building a network where you can feel less lonely doing this.
In Aotearoa, it's similar to Poland about, disability is seen in this charity way, or like, yes, you did art therapy. And so I come from, again, a place of privilege, because I moved to New York, and when I went to New York, I noticed that no one really looked at me, whereas in New Zealand, I feel like everyone's always looked at me. And I feel like in New York, it doesn't really matter what you look like, how you walk, nothing because we've got no time, we need to get where we are, everyone looks different. And so that kind of anonymity opened a real experience of possibility for me, whereas in Aotearoa I felt very mixed race, very disabled, not very disabled, but like everyone's looking at you because you're all those intersections. Whereas when I was in New York, all those intersections don't necessarily mean someone is going to look at you. But I do think that's a really important place to go. Like, how can we work together? How can we not be the only exceptional artist? I think that's really important. And during the pandemic, because I did move back to Aotearoa, I really missed this community of disabled artists that I had met in New York. And so as a group, I feel like you have experience as teachers, as facilitators, or people who've founded organizations. I would love to learn more about your experience of how we can build collectively together, or what does that legacy look like for you, or what is your experience as a teacher, community organizer, or founder?
I have to tell you that my experience is pretty much negative because I run an organization for the rights of women with disabilities back in Poland with a number of colleagues. And actually we did a lot of work, we did a lot of advocacy and a lot of education, but we hardly did anything for ourselves. And I feel like what we need actually is to focus the energy to within and not without. And like with the awareness that it's not about shutting ourselves up in another ghetto, but I feel we need to focus on ourselves, on our resources, and to create the energy that we could later use to do outreach work.
Na experiência como professor e
In my experience as a teacher, be that in the classroom or out of there, relating to makers and to students in dance, what I really want to explore is this idea of spatiality, of how people relate to each other on the space and how that relationship allows them to build their own language on the space. So what I feel that I explore spaces so much is exactly to break the hierarchical idea of people that need to be looking down on someone, or that people have to be stationary in spaces. So I want to break the concepts of where you should be. So if a body like mine looks like it shouldn't be going up the stairs, I want to go up the stairs. And if another body that should be going up the stairs maybe should be crawling on the floor. And how does that difference happen between what we perceive as this should be done to what it could be done, and what can be created of that? It's a change of perspective to break this hegemonic thinking.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really rich to kind of think with you all, and I love that we've kind of dived into this idea of space and relationships, time and space, memory, and then whether we want to be labeled or not, if we want to be in or out, how we can break kind of the labels that are given to us. And I think that's really an interesting prompt for another panel about, you know, how you perceive yourself and then how others perceive you is, you know, an interesting question. But I'd just like to thank you for your time. Whawhetai tele lava.
Thank you. Thank you.